we're going to talk about the basics of auto-clustering your autosomal DNA matches. And I was told that this title was a mouthful. So sorry about that. What does that exactly mean? Some of you might ask. Well, many of you are probably familiar with clustering your DNA matches, which basically means sorting your DNA matches into groups of related matches. So for instance, on Ancestry DNA, I've had several programs where I've talked about using the colored dots system at Ancestry that you can manually go in and look at each match yourself and decide how you might be related to that person and assign that person to a color-coded dot, representing one of the lines of your family, like your grandfather's side, your grandmother's side, your great-grandfather's side, and so on. So that's clustering your DNA matches into groups based on the common ancestor that you might share with that cluster. So auto-clustering is basically using a tool to automatically cluster and sort your DNA matches into related groups for you. So this is using a tool to do that work that you might have done manually. And when you get the report back from the tool, it will look something like this. So each of the colored squares, like this pink colored square, the orange colored square, the yellow colored square, those are clusters of related matches. So you would expect them all to be descended from a common ancestor couple. So basically, and there are pros and cons to doing this. So one pro is it's a lot quicker and easier than sorting your matches out manually one by one. Another pro would be that if you can identify the common ancestor couple of that cluster, you can use this information to further your family research. You may be able to use the clusters to break through a brick wall, such as adoption or unknown ancestor situations. Now, some cons, and this is a big con, the number one con would be that you cannot do this with your Ancestry DNA results. So these automated clustering programs do not work with Ancestry DNA, is basically the gist of that. And that's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. Some people, when they try it, they don't find the clusters helpful, or they might find that the graphic depicting the clusters is too complicated for them. So if you don't find this technique useful to you, that's no big deal. It's okay. It's an optional tool. You don't have to use it. It's just a way of trying to help you sort your matches and visualize how you're related to them or how you might be related to them. Okay, so websites that offer auto clustering. There are several websites that do this. I'm mentioning 3 of them tonight. There are others. So, and you can probably name those, in the chat if you wanted to. But these are the ones that I'm choosing to talk about tonight because we don't have a lot of time. MyHeritage DNA. So you could take a test, you could take an autosomal DNA test with MyHeritage. So MyHeritage is the only company that allows you to cluster your matches from their company website, other than Ancestry. Ancestry allows you to do the color coding, but it doesn't do it automatically for you. MyHeritage has an automated tool that you just go in and tell it to cluster your results, and it will cluster them. So MyHeritage has this option. So if you test at MyHeritage, you can use this tool. If you uploaded your DNA to MyHeritage from another site, you have to pay the $29 unlocking fee, and you will be shown that when you try to click on the clustering, it'll say basically that you haven't, you don't have that feature and you need to pay the $29. So if it prompts you to do that, that's what you need to do. So that's MyHeritage. But for the people that have tested at MyHeritage in the first place, purchased a DNA test for MyHeritage, this comes with your testing, basically, this option. The other two companies are Genetic Affairs and DNA GEDcom. These are both paid subscription sites. The subscription is not much. I believe for Genetic Affairs, there's different there's different levels of subscription, and they each cost, you know, a different amount. I signed up for the $5 a month program. So not very much. You can start it and stop it at any time. So you could sign up for 1 month, try it out, then drop it. But you have to remember to go back in and drop it. You have to go back in and change your credit card, take your credit card out. DNA GEDcom, I paid $10 a month for that subscription. And those two websites will cluster MyHeritage matches, Family Tree DNA matches, and 23andMe matches. And I've given you the website addresses there as well as in your handout. So let's take a quick gander at the different websites and a little bit about what you might see when you get there. So this is for MyHeritage. You can get to the clustering tool several different ways on MyHeritage. So this is from the match page. I'm at the match page of my great aunt, and over here you can see DNA tools by the first arrow. There's also the drop-down menu at the top there, the top right, that says DNA. If you click on that, then it opens up the menu and you can see DNA tools there by the second arrow. So those are both ways that you can access the clustering tool at MyHeritage. When you do that, it opens up this window here, and you can see that AutoClusters is in the middle there. Then at the AutoCluster page, you can see that you can pick who you want to generate a cluster for. My name is listed there because I am the person that has the account at MyHeritage. But then you can see there, if you might be able to see, there's a little drop-down menu. And that is where I can pick a different kit. So I have loaded my mother's DNA, my father's DNA, my great aunt's DNA, and several other relatives to MyHeritage. So I can choose which one I want to run the clusters for. And it will go to their set of matches. So then I click generate there, the purple button, and then you wait. And about a half an hour later or so, you're going to get a file emailed to you. And this is going to be the results of your AutoCluster. And the MyHeritage file is going to consist of 3 items: a README file, which is basically instructions on how to read the clusters, a graphic HTML file, which opens in a web browser, and a CSV, which is a spreadsheet file, which would open in Excel or a similar program. You want to save this zip file to your computer and then open it from the computer. You don't want to try to open it from the email. It rarely works that way. So you save it first, then you open. When you open, then this is the instructions. So this is the README file that's giving you some information about what it is you're going to be seeing with this cluster, the cluster analysis. And then this is the clusters. Again, this is the MyHeritage version, and you're going to get really familiar with MyHeritage because I'm going to go into great detail on one of these MyHeritage clusters that I was working on. So basically, again, you've got at the top here, this pink cluster is cluster number 1. You can see over here on the right-hand side, it tells you cluster number 1 has 15 members. And then cluster number 2 is the orange group, and they are 10 members. And so these are people that are shared matches with my great aunt, because this is her clusters that we're looking at, and they're shared matches with each other for the most part. And we will go into this in much more detail. And then this is down at the bottom of the page where it tells you more information about each person in the cluster. We've got 15 people in this cluster. We've got their names. We've got some different data about them. And then this is the CSV file. And I have to say that I do not do much with the CSV files. If you are a spreadsheet kind of person, and spreadsheets, you love spreadsheets, you love manipulating them, you love working with them, they make sense to you, then you may find the spreadsheet option really helpful and useful to you. I personally use spreadsheets as little as possible because I don't like them. I'm not a numbers person. So I prefer this graphic version, and that's what I tend to use more than the CSV version. Okay, Genetic Affairs would be the next company. And again, you go to their website and you can see up at the top, you'll have to create a username and password. Now, Genetic Affairs does offer a free trial. So I was going to show you that. So you can get a free trial, which will allow you to do 1 or 2 clusters for free. So you could try it out and see what you think before you actually subscribe and become and pay the subscription fee. So once you do that, they have you go in and they ask you for your login information, basically from 23andMe or Family Tree DNA. There's another way that you do the MyHeritage, but this is showing you how to do the 23andMe and Family Tree DNA. So you're going to put in your login and password for those companies so that Genetic Affairs can log into your account and pull out your matches. And then this is the page where you would run the different reports. And you can see that there's an AutoCluster report and there's an AutoClusters report. We're not going to get into the weeds about what all this is, but just this is generally speaking how you would set it up and how you would do it. And then the results again are emailed to you in a zip file, which you want to download to your computer. And again, you get an HTML graphic file and a CSV spreadsheet file. And this is an example of the AutoCluster for one of my great aunts again. And you can see she's got fewer clusters, but she's got an orange one, a green one, a red one, a purple one, and so forth. And those are all shared matches with her and with each other, and should be descended from a common ancestor or ancestor couple. And then down the page, you get more information about the matches, and you also get a lot of explanation. So this is Genetic Affairs. I would suggest you read through all of this, and he also has links to a number of YouTube videos and blog postings that tell you about how to use Genetic Affairs. And so these are all helpful to you. So if you're trying to figure out, again, whether you want to do this, whether it makes sense to you, Genetic Affairs does a really good job of providing you with help and information about how to use their product and what it is you're trying to do. So that's all good. Okay, DNA GEDCOM. I can't really show you a lot from this program because we don't have enough time tonight, but basically the gist of it is your output looks the same. So this is the report that you would get back. And you can see it looks like the other reports. You've got different groups. You've got a dark purple group, a light blue group, a red group, a turquoise group, and so forth and so on. So this is the same basically as the other companies. They're all very similar in the graphic that they create for you, and it's a grid that you can see. And like I said, we're going to go into it more in a minute here. But that's what DNA GEDCOM looks like as well. Now, a lot of you might be saying that graphic does not make sense to me. Okay, we're going to kind of pick apart the graphic and talk about what it is exactly showing you. So hopefully it won't be so unfamiliar to you by the end of this. So some people call it a matrix, but I'm going to call it, well, I'm probably going to call it the graphic. So each large colored box is a group or cluster of related DNA matches. All persons in that cluster are shared matches with you or the test taker. And the members of the cluster are probably shared matches with each other. Sometimes they are not, but the majority of them are. And so the tool has determined that because of the number of shared matches between people in the group, that this group is all one big group of cluster who are related to each other and related to a common set of ancestors. So again, I've shown you this before, but we're going to pick apart one of my great aunt's clusters at MyHeritage. So you can see it says MyHeritage at the top right. That's telling us which company we're looking at. And this is my great aunt's kit. So this is not my kit. It's my grandmother's sister's kit. And her biggest cluster is right here, cluster number 1. It's pink. And like I said, there's 15 members in it. And so we're going to go and look at this in depth. So here I've blown up the pink group. And I have showed you more of the people's names so that we can kind of see their first names, so we can refer to the matches by their first names. I'm trying to shield their identities so you don't know their last names and you cannot figure out who these matches might be. So this matrix here, you can see that there's names across the top and across the side. And these are the same names. They're just listed twice. So, and they're in the same order. So across the top, we've got Gary, Jeremy, Diana, David, Kelly, Tim, Renee, and so forth. And down the side, we've got Gary, Jeremy, Diana, David, Kelly, Tim, Renee, and so forth. So this is the grid that is showing us the relationships between these people in this group. Now remember, this is my great aunt's cluster of matches, and all of these people match my great aunt. So there's not a question about that. What the grid is showing us is that how they're interrelated with each other. So each cell that is colored pink indicates that these two matches are shared matches or in common with each other. And each cell that is blank indicates that those two matches are not shared or not in common with each other. So you can see here that Gary is shared matches with almost everybody, starting with Kelly and going to the right on the grid, all the way over to Roy. But he's missing Jeremy, Diana, and David here at the very beginning. So they are not shared matches with Gary. That's basically what this is telling us, because the grid, the little cell is blank there, where Jeremy and Gary intersect and Diana and Gary intersect. Now, several of the people in this group are matches with everybody in the group. You can see that Renee is, if you take Renee and we go all the way across from Renee from left to right, you can see that there's there's pink in every one of the boxes. Sevilla, same way. And this person whose name begins with R, same way. And so basically, we're not going to be overly concerned about this, but I wanted you to see why the square looks the way that it is, why it has some blank cells in the matrix, is because those are indicating that those two matches are not matching each other. Remember, everybody in this group matches my great aunt, but they match each other different ways. But the tool at MyHeritage has determined that this shared match group do all probably descend from a common ancestor or ancestor couple. So the fact that they don't all share matching with each other, don't let that concern you. Enough of them share matching with each other that they are considered a group. And it's probably just that they're low level matches with each other, or if you're a fourth cousin, if your fourth cousin matches, if you're, okay, let me start that again. If your tree and somebody else's tree shows that you are genetically fourth cousins with one another, genealogically fourth cousins with one another, you may or may not share enough DNA with that person to actually be a DNA match with one another. I believe that the statistic is that 50% of genealogical fourth cousins do not share enough DNA with each other to show up as a DNA match at the DNA companies. So a lot of these people could be fourth and fifth cousins with one another, not sharing enough DNA to show up as shared matches, but genealogically being related to one another. Hopefully that made sense. I think I lost myself in that explanation, but so this is what the grid is telling you. Now let's go down and look at something else on the grid. Oh, okay, yeah, I had this slide in here, which basically summarizes what I just said. If the cell is colored in, the two people match each other. If the cell is not colored in, the two people do not match each other. Okay, this dark, it's only a little bit darker, so it's kind of hard to see, but you can see that starting with this first square right here and going down, this is called the grid line, from this arrow going on down here. And this is just the point where the person is matching with themselves. So Gary is intersecting with Gary, and Jeremy in the second slot is intersecting with Jeremy. So it's not, you know, it's basically just kind of blocked out because it's not really a match per se. It's just where the person is intersecting with themselves on the grid. So that's just an explanation of what that is. Now, sometimes your clusters can be related to each other. And this is not a very good example, but you see these grayed out, there's two grayed out areas that are outside of the clusters. So, you know, here's the outline of the orange cluster, and here's the outline of the yellow cluster. And then these gray guys, these gray shaded areas are outside of the squares. They're outside of the orange cluster, they're outside of the yellow cluster. And what that is telling you is that somebody from the orange cluster is matching somebody in the yellow cluster. At this point, it's only one person, and we can trace it. We can see over here, it's with Karen. So if we go over to the left-hand side and we go down to Karen, and then we trace Karen all the way across from left to right on the grid, we get over here to this gray cell. So it's Karen. And then if you trace it up to the top grid, it goes to Anne. So Karen and Anne is in the yellow square and Karen is in the orange square. They are showing as a shared match to each other. Is this significant? We don't know at this point. It could be suggesting that there might be a relationship between the orange cluster and the yellow cluster, but you need to do a lot more research. And technically, you'd want to have more people that were overlapping before you got really excited about it. But it is something to look at both of the trees for Karen and Anne and see if you can see an overlap. And then maybe wait to see if more people overlap in the matches in the future. Now, here's an example from a different grid that's going to show you this more, where it may be more significant. So you can see on this one that the orange square and the green square seem like they could be related to one another because they have two intersections where the arrow is here. And then the red square and the purple square, those clusters could be related to each other as well because they have two intersections where people from the red the red cluster are also related to people in the purple cluster. So again, you would want to do more research into that, but definitely the clusters can overlap each other and be interrelated more than one way, or so it's just something to keep in mind. That's what these gray areas that are outside of the cluster boundaries are telling you, is that there's the individual matches are matching each other in different ways. And again, you need to look at the trees yourself and see if you can find the commonality. And you don't ever want to assume that that means that they're all related on the same line. It might be a totally different line. It might be some kind of semi-endogamous population where a lot of people in that community are related multiple ways. Okay, now back to dissecting this. So this is telling us, again, we're back to cluster number 1 again, that pink cluster that we were looking at. This is the details, and this is down at the bottom of the screen. After you look at the graphic part of it, you can see this basically textual version of the people in the cluster. So I'm going to blow that up a little bit so we can see it a little better. The 3 areas that I would pay most attention to are, you've got the name of your match here, and you've got the number of centimorgans that you share with the guy. So this is Gary. My great aunt shares 38 centimorgans with him. Jeremy, she shares 45. Diana, she shares 158. So Diana, David, and Kelly are all pretty close matches to my great aunt. And that's kind of why we're studying this cluster, because I'm able to tell you how some of these people are related to her. So centimorgans in common is this first column here that's entitled CM. Then over on the very far right, that column is tree. So again, this is from MyHeritage clustering. And so this tree is on their MyHeritage account. So Gary has a tree attached to his account, and it's got 20 people in it. And if I click on this 20, I can go into his tree. Jeremy has a tree attached to his account that has 854 people in it. And if I click on this link, I can go right into his tree as well. So this is also another reason why I chose to tell you about this cluster, because all these people have trees. Sometimes you have a cluster where nobody has a tree, and that is kind of disastrous because you can't figure out who these people are for the most part. It's much more difficult. And then this over here, notes, this is where I type in a note about this match. So you can see I've entered notes about some of these people. Jeremy, Diana, David, and Kelly. I wrote in a note that said the word Kellogg. And I'll explain to you what that note means in a minute. Okay, so the details about the clusters, like I said, the number of centimorgans, the trees, and the nodes, those are all important fields that you want to kind of study when you're working with your clusters. Okay, now, what are we going to do with this? Now we have this cluster of 15 people that my great aunt is related to. And what can we make of this? What can we learn from this? From knowing that all these people are related to each other and to her? Well, first of all, we want to look at my great aunt's tree for a second, and we want to familiarize ourselves with it. And we're going to be going back and forth between her tree and the trees of those matches, right? So that's one of our main methods of trying to figure out how these people are all related to each other, is comparing and contrasting trees. So this is my great aunt's tree. You can see it goes back to the second great grandparents, and we can go back further. All of these are clickable except for that one there for James Allen. All of these go back further to the third great grandparents and the fourth great grandparents usually. All right, so I would say if you're going to be starting out trying to work with these clusters and trying to make sense of this whole process, you want to pick something that's going to be easier for you to work with. And that is going to be a cluster where you recognize the name of a known relative already. So hopefully you have some known relatives that have tested at these sites, and you can recognize maybe a name of a cousin or in the name of a surname that you might recognize from your family, and start with that cluster, and start with a cluster that's bigger and has a lot of trees attached to it, because you're going to need to look at the trees to figure this all out. So then after you've picked the right cluster to start with, you want to establish how you were related to the known relative. And so after you establish that, then you want to view the trees of the other people in that cluster, looking for names and places in common with your tree and the same branch that the known relative is on. So let's go ahead and look at my aunts cluster again, my great aunts cluster, and you can see what I'm talking about. So here's my great aunts cluster, and we're going to try to identify the people that we already know in this cluster, and we do know several of them. They're known relatives. And then we're going to look at the trees and just kind of work on trying to find the common ancestor couple that this cluster is descended from. So if you recall, I had made notes for Jeremy, Diane, David, Kelly, and Sevilla. And I had put in that they were Kellogg's. So that is a name from my family tree. So this pink cluster is already looking like it's probably a Kellogg cluster. And so here's my great aunt's tree again, and you can see my great aunt's grandmother is named Lydia Kellogg, and her parents are John Abel Kellogg and Jane Spencer. And then John Abel's parents are Martin and Eliza Eaton, and Jane's parents are John Spencer and Lucy Ayres. Now, I would say that this cluster, if I'm correct on my deduction, this cluster is going to be either descended from this couple, John and Jane, or descended from Martin and Eliza, or John and Lucy. Or it could be a combination of people that are from any of these four lines. So we want to keep this whole branch of our tree in mind as we start going through the cluster and looking at the trees. So like I said, we're going to focus in on the names of Kellogg, Eaton, Spencer, and Ayres. And we also want to focus on the places where these families lived. And they lived in a number of places. They all eventually ended up in Michigan, but they got there by way of Ohio, New York State, Vermont, and England. So those places are going to be kind of important too. If I see a bunch of people in this cluster who are from England, I might say, oh, maybe they're from the Ayres side of the family, because the Ayreses were from England. So I'm going to be looking in the trees of the matches of cluster number 1 for these places and names. So here's the trees, remember, and all I have to do is click in to the tree from this this page. This is my cluster report, remember. So David is one of the matches that I actually recognized, and I know that he's a relative of mine. And so he's got a tree, and his tree mentions the Kellogg's, like I said. Then Renee also has a tree. She's also one of the matches that I recognized as a known relative of mine. And you can see again that on Renee's mother's side, she's got Kellogg's. And in fact, she's got the same people that I was just telling you about. She's got John Kellogg and Jane Spencer on her tree. She's got Martin Kellogg, Eliza, his wife, John Spencer, and Lucy Ayres. So she's got the same whole branch of the tree that my great aunt had. So this is looking good, right? This is looking good that we can figure at least part of this cluster out. So when I go, so I made up a little tree here so that you can see this, but you might want to do this when you're working on your clusters as well. Make up a little tree where you just show how you're related to everybody in the cluster as far as you can tell. So this is looking at, the known relatives and also those trees. We had those trees. We could figure out from those trees kind of what was going on with both David and Renee. Now, for some reason, oh, you know what I did? I think this Andrew here in this tree is supposed to be David. Okay, well, anyways, I made a little boo-boo there. But you can see up at the top, we've got the shared ancestor couple of all of those matches so far. We've got John Kellogg and Jane Spencer. And then you can see that they had at least 2 children. My line comes through Lydia, which goes to my great aunt's father, which goes to my great aunt, who is the test taker. And then the other child is Frederick, and he had at least 2 children, Andrew and Hazel. And you can see that this is David, which it doesn't say David, sorry about that. This is David and his sister Diana. They come down from Andrew. And then from Hazel, we've got Renee and her 2 children, Jeremy and Kelly. So these are known relatives, and we can quickly place them on our tree, and we can figure out my great aunt's relationship to them, genealogically speaking. So great aunt and Andrew are second cousin once removed. Great aunt and Diana are second cousin once removed. Great aunt and Renee are second cousin once removed. And great aunt to Jeremy and Kelly, their second cousin twice removed because they are Renee's children. So we figured out 5 of our matches already because these were known relatives and we were able to quickly place them on our tree. Now, because we have identified this line, remember what I said before, that we think that this match group, this cluster number 1, is going to be either related to the Kellogg's or the Spencers or both. All the matches that we found so far are related to this couple, this ancestor couple, John and Jane. But some of the other matches in this group could be from John's brothers and sisters or Jane's brothers and sisters, or even further up the tree. So we still have to keep in mind that this group could be a mixture of Kellogg and Spencer matches, and just kind of keep an open mind to that. So what about the other people? So we have 3 other people in the cluster that have good trees. So that's Gary, Gailene, and Phyllis. So you can see this on our cluster again. So here's our cluster, 15 people. We've crossed out the Kellogg's that we've already matched and put on our tree. And then we've got Gary at the top. He has 20 people in his tree. We have Gailene, who has 7 people in her tree. And we have Phyllis down at the bottom, who has 247 people in her tree. So we want to look at all of those trees and see if we can make any matches, right? Are they Kellogg's? Are they Spencer's? Are they Harris's, remember, or Eaton's? So here's Gary's tree, and Gary's tree is small. He's got his parents, his grandparents, and 1 set of great-grandparents. None of the surnames that we were looking for are listed on this tree. And when I looked at the places that these people are from, they're not from the places where I mentioned either. I think his tree, everybody's from Iowa. Okay, Gailene has an even smaller tree. She's got herself, her parents, and her grandparents. And I think everyone on this tree might be from Illinois. So again, nobody from the area where we're looking at, but it's a small tree, right? Phyllis, now Phyllis had a promising looking tree of over 200 people. But when we look at all these names, none of them ring a bell with us. So this is unfortunate, but this happens. This is very common, right? When you're looking at your matches trees and you say, well, gosh, I don't see anything there that I recognize. And then you kind of move on. Well, if our goal is to try to fit everybody in this 15-person cluster together on the Kellogg and Spencer tree, then we want to do a little bit of extra effort. So we can build out trees for these matches to try to figure out the connection and just continue expanding their trees. They are more distantly related to my great aunt, so it may be back another generation through John Kellogg's parents or Jane Spencer's parents. So remember, here's great aunt's tree again. So the matches that we have don't appear to be the Phyllis, Gary, and Gailene that we just looked at. They don't appear to be descended from John and Jane. They're more distant matches, probably. And so we'd be looking at either this section of the tree with Martin and Eliza, or John and Lucy, or even further back with Martin's parents, Eliza's parents, John's parents, or Lucy's parents. So we're still on this branch of the tree. We would expect the people to be related to us somewhere along this branch, but we don't know where. So here's Gailene again. So here's what I'm talking about. So Gailene has this small tree, but Gailene gives us enough information about her relatives that we can start researching them herself, right? So we've got the names of her grandparents, and we have their full names, and we have their birth and death dates and who they were married to. So I think with this information that Gailene has put in her tree, I can continue researching these people. I would just go into Ancestry or Family Search and type in Willie Lee Bowen, born 1861, died 1900, and see if I can come up with a tree that shows his parents, or see if I can come up with a census record or a birth or death record for him, and just continue tracing Gaylene's tree back. And because Gailene only shares 39 centimorgans with my great aunt, that makes her in a real squishy category. She could be a third cousin with my great aunt. She could be a fourth cousin with my great aunt. She could be a fifth cousin. She might even be a sixth cousin. That's a little outside of the bounds, but it could be. So I would theoretically want to expand her tree back 3 or 4 more generations. So back from Willie, several more generations. Back from Clara, several more generations. Looking for, and probably I will find one of those surnames that I'm looking for. The Kellogg, remember Kellogg, Eaton, Spencer, or Harris. So that's what you've got to do with these matches that don't have a very big tree. So after I worked on that, maybe I'll be able to add Gary, Gailene, and Phyllis to this tree. I hope so. I have not done that work yet, so I cannot tell you whether it happened or it didn't happen, but that's what I would do. Now, if you recall, there were some other matches that did not have a tree. Let's see. So we've got, or they had a very minimal tree. So we've got Lori down here, no tree. We've got Carol and Mark and Tim that have 2 people in their tree. Now, maybe the tree with 2 people in it is going to be useful, but I'm thinking it probably won't. So what are we going to do with those matches? Well, you can do several things. Now, because this is MyHeritage, you don't have their email address. You cannot email them. You can message them through the MyHeritage messaging system. And you don't want to overwhelm them with a long, exposition about you and your family and your genealogy and so forth. You want to be kind of short and sweet, but, say that you're on your tree and you think that you might have figured out how you're related to them, but you're not sure. And do they recognize maybe the names that you have? So I would say, do you recognize the name Kellogg? Eaton, Spencer, or Harris? And then I might say, or did you have family members living in Michigan or Ohio? Or, give the names of the counties where these families were living. Something like that. You may or may not get a reply. MyHeritage matches have actually been fairly good at answering me. Each company has a little bit of a different flavor. Some of the companies like Ancestry, I hardly ever get a reply from those people, but I haven't messaged that many people at MyHeritage, but I would say probably 50% of the people have actually gotten back to me, which is pretty good percentage. So you might get some results with that. If the person has a really uncommon name and they're a high level match with you, it might be beneficial to you to Google their name and see if you can find them in real life and find obituaries and different records about their family, maybe some find a grave records or something that show you who their parents are, and you could just start researching them yourself that way if you could identify who the match is. And again, you're not going to be bothering them. You're just going to try to figure out who they are so you can trace their tree yourself and figure out the connection yourself. And the goal is eventually to place all of these people on my Kellogg and Spencer tree that I made, right? And so, oh, let me go back to that page for a minute. Okay, so that's what I would do for cluster number 1. And we've actually made pretty good progress, right? I hope everyone can see that we've identified the branch of my great aunt's family that cluster is from, and we know the surnames, and we know where to look and what, how these other matches that we haven't identified yet, we know approximately how they should fit in. And we know what we need to do to figure it out. We need to just, for the people that have trees, we will continue to try to work those trees and add generations to the trees to try to tie them in to our Kellogg and Spencer family. And the people without trees, you know, we'll try to contact them and see what we can do with that as well. But I feel really good about what we did with cluster number 1. Now, you would repeat the same process for the other clusters. And remember that my great aunt had, you know, maybe 15 clusters. Not all of them were as large as cluster number 1. That was the largest one, I believe. So, and not all of them had good trees, and not all of them had matches that we recognize the name of, but some of them did. So I think you can probably do this for your own matches with some success. Now, having said that, not all clusters can be identified. So sometimes you share a really low centimorgan amount with everybody in the cluster. Let's say you share 30 centimorgans, about 30, 35 centimorgans with everybody in the cluster. That could mean that you're 4th or 5th cousins with all of these people. And it could be on a line of your family that maybe you haven't traced back to the 4th or 5th or 6th great grandparents. And so it's a little bit out of reach. Those types of clusters, if you do get a breakthrough on them, they could be a breakthrough that breaks open one of your brick walls on your family tree. But you have to get that first match that kind of opens up the door for you to know how you're related to that cluster. So, and it's difficult when the clusters have no trees, when the matches have no trees, obviously. You need at least 1 or 2 people in the cluster to have a fairly good tree that you could start working on and tracing. So I would say be patient with some of those clusters that you don't seem to get anywhere with. And you can rerun your cluster every 6 months or so, and that will pick up new matches at the testing companies. So if you're doing the MyHeritage one, it'll pick up your new MyHeritage matches. And if you're doing it at Genetic Affairs or DNA GedCon, it will pick up, you know, your new family tree your new family tree DNA matches or your new 23andMe matches. So rerun the clusters every once in a while, and they will change. And you will get new matches, and maybe it will be the match that you need to break open how you're related to this cluster and maybe answer a question that you had about your tree. So hopefully that has helped you somewhat with this process. And I didn't really show this in my example because I was showing examples of my family and we're not adopted. But this would be a helpful tool, I think, for people who are working on adoptions, just in helping sort out your matches initially. Like sometimes the adopted person looks at their match page and they see all these names of people, and of course they don't know any of them because they were adopted, and so they know nothing usually about their birth family, and so they can quickly get overwhelmed. This process, I think, would help them, see how their matches are related to each other, which, if they understand the concept, might help them work through trying to figure out from the DNA matches who their birth family might have been. So this could be a tool that would help adoptees if the graphic and the presentation of this tool is something that clicks with the adoptee. And like I said, this is not something for everybody. This tool may not make sense to everybody. It may not make sense for your situation. But I would say just, give it a try, see what you think, and hopefully this little brief overview helped you.